Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started here. It's a little bit after 12. I know some other folks are going to trickle in, but we want to be cognizant of everybody's time. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Shalene Walker. I'm the long-range planning manager for Travis County. Commissioner Shea could not be here today. She double-booked herself, so she asked that I please join you, which I was thrilled to do when I learned that we would have Charles Marohn here. Travis County, I want to make one big announcement really quickly, self-service announcement. There is an election going on. I hope everybody votes one way or the other. Please, early voting. Today is the last day to vote, and November 3rd is the election. There are a lot of ballot initiatives. Hello, welcome. Charles Marohn, also known, may we call you Chuck? Okay. To his friends and colleagues, is a professional engineer licensed in the state of Minnesota and a member of AICP, the American Institute of Certified Planners, as you can see. He has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's in urban and regional planning. He is the author of Thoughts on Building Strong Towns, Volume 1, and a world-class transportation system, as well as the primary author of the Strong Towns blog and host of the Strong Towns podcast. Chuck and his wife live with their 2 daughters and 2 Samoyeds.
They're big, white, fluffy snow dogs.
That we don't see a lot of here in Texas.
Hopefully not. They would not like Texas very much.
Just north of Baxter, Minnesota. And I'll put out a plug for chuckstrongtowns.org. There's some flyers over there. It is a membership organization. If you like what you hear or want to learn more, we hope you'll join the club.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I hate podiums because I feel it's like I'm separate and above you, and I'm not, and I don't like that feeling. They've asked me to stand here because there's a camera right here that's recording me. I'm not sure why they need me and not like the other things, but I'm going to disobey and I'm going to walk a little bit. But I have only a limited room that I'm able to, so just bear with me if I do this. Yeah, okay, you can still hear me. This is working. All right. Thank you so much. Our organization, Strong Towns, started out as a blog back in 2008. I started writing, trying to answer the question for myself, why are our cities struggling financially? Why, despite all the growth, all the jobs, all the investments, do our cities struggle just to do basic things, fix potholes, maintain sidewalks? Why? And in 2008, I got to the point professionally where I thought I had some ideas, and I started to write. After a year of writing, a couple of friends of mine came to me and said, this is pretty decent. You should really do something with this. You should start a nonprofit. And I had worked with nonprofits before, not real impressed. I said, look, I'm not a nonprofit person. I don't want to do that. They said, well, you just keep writing, and we'll fill out the paperwork. So they did. A year later, we had a 501c3. And a few months after that, a local foundation in Minnesota where I work invited me to come and talk to them, and they actually encouraged me by giving me a 3-year startup grant. They gave me $50,000 a year for 3 years to see what we could do with this set of ideas. And shortly thereafter, I started going out and sharing this message with cities. And first it was around my home area, it was around the state, and pretty soon we got invited to North Dakota and Wisconsin. And then we said, we took a trip out to California. And I was really nervous because I thought, I've got some ideas and I've got some things that I think are going on, and will this work out in California? And up and down the coast, I was there for 6 days, gave 11 talks, and we packed rooms, and people were enthusiastic about this message. We have since given this talk, now we're getting up to around 250 times. And in cities big and small, in almost every state in the country. I've given this talk, or a variation of this talk here, this is my 3rd time now, so the audience is exponentially growing each time, so the next time I come back, we'll have to get an even bigger room. But we're going to talk a little bit today about the answer to that question. Why are our cities struggling financially despite all the growth and development? I want to have you go back to the way we built cities thousands of years ago, and imagine what they were like. These are 2 artist renderings. The one on the left is an ancient city called Ur. The one on the right is, of course, ancient Rome. If you think about how these were built, they were built around the dominant transportation technology of the day, that of course being your 2 feet. People walked everywhere, and so the layout of the buildings, the spacing, the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day was all based around a society of people who walked. We can fast forward thousands of years to, this is my hometown back in the early 1900s. People would arrive by stagecoach, they'd arrive by train, but when they got there, they would get off and they would walk everywhere. And so the distance between different types of things, the spacing, all of this was based very similarly around a society of people who walked. Beginning in the early 1900s, and then there's always one, isn't there? He's a friend. Beginning in the early 1900s and then accelerating after World War II, we began to build places around a different transportation technology, right? We began to build places around the automobiles. We came up with different building types, different building styles, different ways of arranging things on the landscape. If we were to go ask people today to explain this transition, they would normally talk about it in terms of progress. We were people who used to walk. We build cities around people who walked. We are now people who drive. We build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around jet cars. And someday we will teleport, and we'll build cities in a completely different way. This is a very comforting, affirming narrative for us because it puts us on this continuum of progress, things always getting better. I want to throw out another idea to put in the back of your brains, one that's not quite as affirming. When we look at this style of development here, even when you get to ancient Ur, which is like 5,000 BC, it's important to understand that human beings had been building places, civilizations, cities for thousands of years. And the knowledge for how to build a place did not come from a classroom, did not come from an ivory tower, it was not theoretical. This was knowledge that was gained slowly and incrementally over time by trial and error experimentation. People tried things, what worked, they would copy and expand upon. What didn't work, they would throw away. And when I mean didn't work, I mean people died, things went bad, right? Civilizations failed. By the time you get to my hometown in the early 1900s, you have a style of development honed and refined over thousands of years, over different continents, different latitudes, and different cultures through trial and error experimentation. When we look at this style of development, even though this seems to us very familiar, this is the way things have always been done, right? It, of course, hasn't been done this way very long. We didn't try this out in Oklahoma to see how it would work, watch it for a couple hundred years, take the best stuff and bring it here to Texas. Right? We just built this way across an entire continent in one generation. The ideas for this weren't developed by trial and error. They largely came from, European intellectual centers, the idea of hierarchical road networks, modern Euclidean zoning. These were all intellectual ideas we imported here. It's important for us to not forget, as we sit and talk about the implications of our development pattern, that this is a huge experiment. No one has ever tried to reshape an entire continent within a very short period of time along a radically different set of principles the way that we have. And while we did it with the best of intentions, there's some financial ramifications of this, certainly, and many others that we could talk about. We're going to focus on the finances today that weren't apparent to people when they first started this. If we look today at the way we finance growth and development within our cities, there's three primary financial mechanisms, and they differ from 100 years ago. 100 years ago, if you were going to experience growth and jobs and economic development locally, that was going to be a byproduct of things you did locally. Now, we use transfer payments between governments, the idea that the federal government, the state government, as our partner in creating growth and jobs and opportunity, make investments in cities. We give out grants, we give out programs and low-interest loans. We help build infrastructure, build public facilities. These create jobs, they create growth. The second is transportation spending. This is the one that you're probably, I won't say most addicted to, but very comfortable with. The idea that we'll collectively pool our dollars, we'll use them to make large, transformative transportation investments. Those create jobs while they're being built, and then we have a platform for growth once they're done. The third mechanism is debt. Public debt is an important part of the conversation, but even more important is private sector debt. the ability of individuals to get long-term financing with little money down at low rates. These mechanisms combine to help us create growth at the local level, which of course is good because the growth gives us the revenue, the fee permits, all the stuff that we need to operate our cities and to make good on all the things we want to do. This is kind of city administration 101. It's important to step back and realize the powerful incentives at work here. When we get new growth, the cost that we pay as local taxpayers of that transaction is usually very small. We may have some staff time, we may have to pay to upsize a pipe, but the millions of dollars being spent to build buildings and build roads and build all this stuff is generally paid for by someone else. We, in exchange, get all of this tax revenue. Developer goes in, builds out the development, we get all the new permit fees, we get all the revenue from that, we get all this taxes. The catch, or what we agree to do, is that we agree to maintain this stuff forever. We take on the long-term liability of fixing and maintaining all those roads and streets and curbs and sidewalks, all those pipes and pumps and valves. That becomes our long-term responsibility. What we are doing, in a sense, is exchanging a near-term benefit in cash for a long-term liability. There's only one of two ways that this strategy makes any sense. Either growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates, which there's actually some people in Texas who believe that that is possible. It's not mathematically possible, of course, but even if it was, we know that economies don't just do this forever, right? There's always this. Or the pattern of development, the way we actually go about building our places, generates for us more excess wealth than it creates in liabilities. Unfortunately, this second assumption also is not true. And this is where, for a little bit of this conversation, I'm going to get a touch technical. I am an engineer. I have to do a little bit of this. It won't be painful, I promise. One of the things that we did early on at Strong Towns was to try to measure the parts of our development pattern that we could actually accurately measure, parts with not a lot of background noise. Engineers, planners, economic development people, we have something that we believe generally that we call at Strong Towns the quantum theory of economic development. It's the idea that you might do a project that makes no sense here, and a project that makes no financial sense here, and another project that makes no financial sense. But when you add them up, they become something magical that creates wealth and prosperity. We call this the quantum theory because you can't actually measure any of it. But there are parts of our system where we can measure, where we can say, this would only exist for these people, right? This is kind of a prime example. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. This is a dead-end road with a cul-de-sac, homes along it. This was built in the early 1990s. It was a gravel road. The city wanted it paved. The city went out and paved it. The city paid half the cost. The property owners paid the other half. We asked the question, all right, this road would only exist for these property owners. If these property owners weren't here, the road would not be there. Based on the taxes the city's collecting from these property owners, how long will it take them to recoup the money they just spent to build the road? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city that long just to recoup the money they put in to build it the first time. It's long term, the city has responsibility to go out and fix it generation after generation after generation. Here's another development. This one is a closed loop with a dead-end cul-de-sac. Again, the only reason this one exists is to serve the people that are there. This was built in the early 1980s. The costs were paid by the developer. It was rolled into people's mortgages. Now the city has to go out and fix it. The cost, $354,000. We asked the question, based on the taxes the city's collecting from the people who live here, the only people who really use this road in any substantive way, how long is it going to take them to recoup the money they just spent to fix it? The answer is 79 years. The road won't last anywhere near that long. So we asked another question, all right, if we were going to try to collect enough money from these property owners between now and the time the road needed to be fixed to actually have the money to fix the road, what would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. The sewer, the water, vastly more expensive. Sometimes people say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We know we lose money on commercial property, we make it, or on residential, we make it up on commercial. Commercials are cash cow. This is a business park. This is one of those build it and they will come investments that cities like to do. It's got the wide industrial streets, sewer, water, full utilities. This was built in the mid-1990s. The city thought it was so successful, every lot is built upon, that they wanted to redo it. They wanted to actually build the same exact thing right next door, the same layout, same design, everything. We asked the question, all right, if we could build the same thing for the same amount of money and get the same amount of investment, would that be a good deal? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million. There's $6.6 million of investment that has happened subsequent. Now, pause for a sec. Of that $6.6 million, 4 of those lots are a church. 2 of the lots are a school bus maintenance facility. They belong to the public school district. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance garage. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance garage. These are all very important public facilities. These are all very important facilities, right? But none of them pay any taxes to the city. Of the remaining properties, the ones that theoretically would be taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or the property owner was given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move in here and build. For the sake of our analysis, we assume that every single lot would be built upon within 12 months by a full non-subsidized tax-paying entity, and every penny of new revenue would go to retiring that bond that was taken out to build that. If that were the case, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, just to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would have to go up to pay for police protection, fire protection, to mow the ditches, and provide every other service that would be needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic of scenarios. Now, I used to go through and show people a dozen or more of these. I was very proud of the work we had done. People would start to cry after a while, and I found I can make the point with just 3. If you're someone who wants more examples, I'll give you our web address at the end. There's a whole bunch of case studies on there. But let me show you what's going on. And again, I'm an engineer, so I like graphs, I like charts. I apologize if you're not a chart person. I will walk you through this one too, so it won't be very painful. Let's say a developer comes to our city. So I have a piece of property here I would like to build upon. I am willing to, at my own expense, build all the buildings. I'm willing to construct all the residential properties, all the commercial properties. I am willing at my expense to build the roads and the streets and the curb and the sidewalks and the pipes and the pumps and the valves. I'll pay for all that. I will follow all of your codes. I'm not asking for any variances. I'm not asking for any subsidies. The only thing that I'm asking is that when I finish doing this investment, that I be allowed to turn it over to you, the city, to maintain. What would we say? We say, fantastic, right? You mean this costs us absolutely nothing? We have to spend nothing? You follow all of our rules? You don't want any subsidies? You're going to build it all? This would be great. I had a council member once say, you mean we get a free road? Yeah, you get a free road. But let's say we're, good, prudent people. We've heard of the strong town stuff. We want to make sure we're being fiscally responsible. So when the revenue from this new development comes in, we take the portion that would normally get spent everywhere else in the city fixing and maintaining stuff, and we just set that aside. And we're going to, every year when that revenue comes in, we're going to add to what we've got, and we're going to set it aside, and we're going to allow it to accumulate so that when we get out a generation from now, we have a pile of money that we can make good on that promise we made when we did the first transaction that we'll fix and maintain and replace and service all this stuff. Here's what that looks like. In year 1, development's brand new. You got a little bit of money that comes in. You take that portion, you set it aside. In year 2, more comes in, you add to what you had in year 1. In year 3, you add a little more. In year 4, and on and on and on. And you see, a 5-year-old road isn't cost you anything. 10-year-old pipe isn't cost you anything. You've just got money coming in and nothing going out. And you get out a couple of decades, you've got quite a pile of money, right? The problem is, when you get to, in this example, year 25, and you have to go out and make good on that promise you made way back in year 1, what you find is that the cumulative amount of revenue is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far into the negative. Now, cities aren't one development, right? Cities are a collection of developments. They're a collection of neighborhoods. So let's say that our developer comes in a couple years after that first development and says, that worked really well for me. It worked really well for you. I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point forward, you get a similar size development. In other words, the ideal scenario for any city, nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that money and we set it aside and we allow it to accumulate so we can make good in the future on all the promises we're making today. This is what that looks like. In the first year, your money comes in from that first development. They pay in, this isn't going to work. They pay in the entire time. Year 3, you've got another development. Year 5, year 7, you can see that your revenue actually kind of starts to accelerate upwards. You're having growth upon growth upon growth. You get out a couple of decades and you feel very, very wealthy. And when you get to year 25 and you have to make good on that promise you made way back in year 1, you can see you've got to spend a little bit of money, right? But it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. The growth has created what we call at Strong Towns the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money on every project that you do, the longer you go out on the time horizon, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to that question that I started with. Why are our cities struggling financially? Why, despite all the growth and all the development and all the investments and all the job creations, are we incapable of doing just basic things? It's because we have a development pattern, an approach to building and growth and development that is insolvent. And it is forcing our cities into insolvency. Now, this is human nature, right? Does everybody recognize that? That this is how we're wired as people? This is why people smoke, right? Smoke today, it's like benefits, and then, I've got emphysema, right? This is why I have that, like the extra bowl of ice cream. I'm not going to take the dog for a walk, and then, I've got, heart disease, diabetes, right? We understand this. As humans, we're wired to value pleasure today and positive things today vastly more than we fear the pain that is decades away. We're wired that way. Why are our cities in this mess today and cities 100 years ago were not? What would have happened 100 years ago, or go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 5,000 years, if you developed in this way? What would have happened to you? You would have failed, and you would not have been copied by someone else. After World War II, we sat in this very unique place as a country where we had lots of very cheap energy. We had these magnificent, huge machines that could now move tons of earth and build amazing things at scale and in a quantity that had never been able to be done before. We had a national psyche of centralization of our economy that allowed us to very efficiently mass produce all of this stuff from highways to homes. All stuff that wasn't around 100 years ago. We are out in uncharted waters. Nobody has ever been where we're at right now. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. There's one other chart I want to show you that kind of puts an exclamation point on where we're at, and then we'll start talking about how we do things differently, how we think about this differently. But it's an important chart. It's this one. This is a chart of debt. Everybody in this room is familiar to one degree or another with the conversation we're having about our national debt, right? Our national debt is huge, trillions of dollars, 18 trillion, something like that. We're having a debate now in Congress about raising the debt ceiling. Should we do it? Should we not? In this chart right here, the bottom line, the blue one, that's our national debt. That's that massive, huge number. That's the growth in our debt. The black one right above it, that's the growth in our GDP, our economy. The green one, the one that soars up like that, that's the growth in our private sector debt. That's debt that we all share. It's home mortgages, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans, private sector debt. The way we finance the first generation of this new experiment is by taking our savings and by reinvesting that illusion of wealth back into creating more growth. When that became insufficient, when the liabilities started to pile up, the economy started to slow down, we couldn't keep growth going at accelerating rates, think mid-1970s to early 1980s. It took us a while to figure out what to do, but we eventually shifted from an economy based on growth through savings and investment to an economy based on growth through debt accumulation. And growth through debt accumulation has become such an important part of keeping our economy going that as we crossed into the third generation of this new experimental way to build, we actually allowed it to become predatory. We actually allowed systems to arise that preyed on our friends and neighbors. We encouraged people who couldn't afford homes to buy homes, who could afford small homes to buy large homes, who could afford large homes to buy multiple large homes, right? We needed the investment so bad that we allowed our financing system to become predatory. We are no longer going to be able to kick the can down the road by having our friends and neighbors take on accelerating levels of debt. Obviously, there's some huge implications here. The mechanisms of growth that we become accustomed to are waning. The federal government, the state governments, the DOTs are vastly overcommitted. The private sector does not have the ability to take on accelerating levels of debt. For us at the local government level, this means that we're going to be forced to absorb the costs of our development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we have to pay for that. If we want that pipe repaired, that money is going to have to come from us. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, I didn't come here today to tell you what you already know, right? You're having an election, talking about how you can raise more money. This is a debate we're having in every city, every level of government, everywhere around this country. How big is the tax increase going to be? Who should pay? How deep is the service cut going to be? And where is it going to be felt? It is critical that we see the third variable in that sentence, the third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build our cities in a way that is functionally insolvent, there is no way they're going to avoid insolvency. As long as we continue to build in an approach that gives us a short-term illusion of wealth in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way that our cities are going to avoid default. Whether that is a hard default, like we see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in thousands of cities across this country, including Austin, where because of budget shortfalls, we are laying off police officers, firefighters, we're closing parks and libraries, we're deferring critical maintenance to another day. We have to start having a conversation about how we build places to be more financially productive. So how do we do this? When that trip I took to California that I told you about, as I'm traveling through the state, at the end of every presentation, I would have someone stand up and they would say, Chuck, I'm really angry with you. You've come here, you scared the heck out of us, you told us the sky is falling, but you didn't give us the solution. What is the solution to these problems? And I realized after a while that I was not quite hearing them right. Because what they were really asking me was something fundamentally different. What they were really asking me was this: what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing, right? We've tried all those. We've tried every single one of those. At Strong Towns, we don't talk about solutions, but we talk about our rational responses. We have created for ourselves a complex set of problems that no one else has ever had, that defy a simple solution. And so at Strong Towns, what we say is, what would thoughtful, intelligent people working together in a community, rolling up their sleeves, facing this complex set of problems, how would they rationally respond? So when we start to talk about rational responses, we start with this photo here. This again is my hometown back in the early 1900s. I live 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. We got snow yesterday. Back then, this was like the middle of nowhere, right? Look at this place. The first time I saw this photo, I was just blown away. The way the buildings line up, the way they frame the public realm at just the right Greco-Roman ratios. The buildings themselves have great symmetry. They front the street beautifully. There's great segmentation of the public realm. This is a beautifully designed street. Let me ask you some questions about these people. How thick was their zoning code? How many boards and committees did you have to go to in this city to get approval to build something? How much tax subsidy do they give out? How many miles of infrastructure do they build to attract this development? How many planners and engineers and economic development advisors do they have on staff? How many federal grants do they get? We can go through the litany of things that we have convinced ourselves are absolutely essential to creating great places. They had none of them. They didn't even have 30-year mortgages. These were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. Look at the place they built. How did they know how to do this? It's really simple. They just copied what they knew worked. They took the materials they had on hand and they built in a style that they had seen work for thousands and thousands of years. After 60 years of engineers and planners and economic development officials giving advice to cities on how to create growth and prosperity, after all the grants and all the loans and all the investments and all the subsidies, here's what this street looks like today. The exact street from the almost exact same spot. It's a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. If you want to understand in one photo why our cities are struggling, understand there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that 2 blocks there. Where is the wealth that is going to sustain that investment generation after generation after generation? I was giving a lecture in Boise, Idaho, and when I got to this slide, a student raised their hand and stood up and said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you do here in the United States. When we build, we have to build 1 block at a time. And before we can build the next block, we have to make sure that every single spot in the block we just built is filled in. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We're a very poor country, and we can't afford to build this way. We're a very poor country now, too. And we can't afford to build this way either. And for a long period of time, that illusion of wealth made us think that this kind of thing didn't matter. That we could have blocks and blocks and blocks of unproductive stuff. That we could have miles of pipe to connect very little. That we could just build and build. And we were so wealthy that it didn't matter. But it matters now. And so we're entering a different age where we have to go back and look and ask ourselves, how do we actually make good, productive use of all this stuff that we built? How do we change? And really, it's more of a mental change than anything else. The very first thing we've got to do is get rid of some bad habits. Build it and they will come is a brilliant movie plot. It is a horrible economic development strategy. It has all the wrong incentives. If you are a local government today, what do you have to do to be taken seriously in the economic development game? And I don't care if you're a small town or as big and wealthy as a place like Austin is. What do you have to do? We are in what we call at Strong Towns the desperation phase of the suburban experiment, because you all know what has to happen, right? We've got to have shovel-ready sites. We've got to have infrastructure in place. We've got to have millions spent to attract growth and development. We've got to have a team ready with tax incentives. If Google should come trolling through town, we've got to be able to throw lots of money at them. If you want to be a player in the game, you've got to be prepared to bankrupt yourself. This is not how cities build wealth. And this is not how cities have ever built wealth. I'm going to show you now the very simple way that cities build wealth. Look at this photo here. Where'd you say? Seattle? This could be Seattle, couldn't it? If the trees were different, it could be Austin, couldn't it? I saw a picture of this of Fort Worth, a picture like this of Fort Worth at one point. Keep going, could be Chicago, right? If you went back far enough in time, it could be Manhattan. This is actually my hometown. This is my hometown in 1870. This is the very first street that was built. 30 years later, this street would become this street. But right now, this is how it started. But this, you guys recognize this, right? Austin started this way. Every city that was built prior to our suburban experiment began just this way. Little hope and a dream. We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market drop 20%? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out Wall Street banks? No. A few people lose a little bit of money, they salvage what they can, and they move on to the next place. We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. When they were successful, they grew in a very simple way. They grew incrementally up, incrementally out, and became incrementally more intense. And so after 30 years of incremental development, this little street of pop-up shacks would become that street I showed you earlier. And as this city continued to grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would eventually become buildings of brick and granite. We don't create wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth is by making small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. Let me show you how powerful this style of development is. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, they're the same size, the same area, the same amount of public infrastructure. They're on the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. That old and blighted block looks like this. In the 1920s, as my city was growing incrementally out, these 3 blocks were the next increment. So what you're looking at here is the cheapest block the cheapest commercial property you could build in the 1920s. This is their version of the pop-up block. And had history continued the way it had for thousands of years, over time these would have become incrementally more intense, incrementally taller. But that's not what happened, right? We had the Depression, we had World War II, and then we had a completely different style of development. Just skipped right over this and started building out on the edge. These places have stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. We labeled it blight. We had it torn down, and now we got in the new taco joint. Everybody was thrilled with this transaction. The planner was happy because the new building met the setbacks and the floor area ratios. There's proper amount of parking, there's proper signage. The engineer was happy because we got rid of the on-street parking so the cars can flow more smoothly. The environmental people were happy because they got a little bit of green space and some native plants in the stormwater area. Even the bike people were happy because they got a little bit of sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right on the edge of that photo there, but they got a little bit. Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new, same size, same area, same amount of public infrastructure, total value of only $800,000. The city actually collects 42% more taxes off that old, junky, rundown block. Understand what you're looking at. You are looking at the traditional pattern of development, the way we built places for thousands and thousands of years, across continents, across latitudes, across cultures. You're looking at it in its infancy, after 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. And everybody knows the trajectory of the taco joint, right? 20 years from now, it'll be a used car lot. There'll be a new taco joint up the road. 10 years later, it will be boarded up. They'll be selling meth out the back, and they'll be trying to get a grant to get it torn down. We've all been around long enough to see this trajectory, right? In fact, we originally did this analysis in 2012. Here's what's happened in the intervening years. Let me ask you a question. We're going to have to do this quick. Think about the things you would do to make that old and blighted block more valuable. Think about the things, you don't have a lot of money, you're kind of going broke, but you want to make it a little bit more valuable. Think about the things you could do, right? Paint the facades, put out some planters, maybe plant some trees, maybe slow the cars down a little bit, change your code so you can have a second story or maybe a residence in the back, connect the sidewalk so people in the neighborhood can actually walk there. There's all kinds of different little things we can do to try to make those buildings more valuable. What would we do to make that taco joint more valuable? You can't buy the property, you don't have a lot of money, you can't force them to do something they don't want to do. There's really nothing. The traditional style of development has tremendous financial upside and very limited financial downside. Our new style of development has limited financial upside and a downside that can literally go negative. This is the same kind of thing we see on the edge of our cities. This is our Mills Fleet Farm complex. Mills Fleet Farm, you guys don't know Mills Fleet Farm down here, do you? Midwestern big box store, extremely popular. When you walk in, you have auto parts, animal feed, lumber, guns and ammo, camouflage lingerie. That's the product mix. It's wildly successful in the Midwest. I have a sense that it would do okay down here. This one has a double-sized big box store, so we built it and then it got doubled, and then there's an auto dealership and a gas station. This is the most valuable 20-acre piece of property in the entire Brainerd Lakes area. This is our 20-acre downtown. If you've ever seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of downtown Brainerd. This is not a great place. Most of the second and third stories are unoccupied. Most of the first stories struggle. Been a lot of rotating clientele in my lifetime. No new buildings have been built in my lifetime, but a number have burned down and are now parking lots. When we look out on the edge of town at that most valuable piece of property, we see a total value of $0.6 million per acre. When we look downtown at our old, rundown, decrepit downtown, the same size area, just a different style of development, you have a total value that's 78% more. The city actually collects 78% more taxes off that rundown 20 acres than that shiny and new. How much should we spend to get that Mills Fleet Farm? Well, we put $150 million as a state into the bypass, millions more into frontage roads and backage roads. We spent tens of millions to get the sewer and water out there. How much did my generation spend to get the wealth in the downtown? Nothing. Those were investments that my great-great-grandparents and their contemporaries made slowly and incrementally over time, and then bequeathed to us as this endowment of sorts that would pay back generation after generation after generation. And we've kind of slowly milked it down. What happens when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? I don't know. But I can tell you that whatever comes next will not be anywhere near as financially productive as that site, right? We've all seen where the big box closes and what comes next. Whatever it is a much lower burn rate, right? Much lower value. There's 134 different properties in that 20 acres downtown. What happens when one of them loses a tenant? Or they figure out that we have too much commercial and not enough residential. Or we have too much residential and not enough commercial. You have a development pattern there in the downtown that is not only really, really productive, but highly adaptable and resilient. You have a development pattern out on the edge that not only fails to have a financial return, is very unproductive, but is also really, really fragile. This is a pattern we see over and over and over again. What I'm going to show you now is some models put together by a good friend and colleague of mine named Joe Minicozy. Joe has taken the way you would look at a farm field. You plant seeds across a field where you get the most that grows up. You say that's the most productive farmland. What he has done is said, where are we getting the biggest financial return? So what you're looking at is value per acre. And this is Buffalo, New York. And I choose Buffalo, New York to show because it is one of these cities that was great and then hollowed out after World War II. They've lost population every census since 1940. Yet when we look at Buffalo, New York, and we ask, where's the wealth and value? Can you show me where the traditional walkable downtown is? It jumps off the map at you. And not only does it jump off the map at you in terms of being a store of wealth, but it absolutely dwarfs everything around it. We see this in cities the size much smaller. This one's about 60,000. We see the same type of pattern. Here's a little city of 1,000, 1,200 actually by my hometown. When we went to this city, they said the stuff on the edge of town is where all the action is. We've got to get rid of these core neighborhoods where things aren't quite working. Then we showed them where all their wealth was. This is a model we did in the city of Lafayette where we did the net. We went through and did a really, really detailed analysis of where their revenue is being produced and where their expenses are. And we were able to break it down by parcels. So where you see green, those are parcels that actually generate more revenue for the city than they cost in expense. And where you're seeing red, those are places that have more expense than they have revenue coming in. The green comprises 3 different areas of the city. The old historic downtown, which is not in that great a shape. A brand new urbanist neighborhood on the edge of the city that was built with traditional design principles, but with modern financing techniques. It was all built at the same time. It will all fail at the same time. I'm going to be interested to see if that one holds its value over time. And then you have this ring, and it's on your right side there, of green, that is the poor neighborhoods. The neighborhoods where they have the homicides and the robberies, where they tell you not to go. Those are the places built generations ago, slowly and incrementally over time. And they still are paying back. What's way out on the edge in the red? Those are the big box stores, the strip malls, the new suburban subdivisions with the 3-car garages. What you're seeing here is 2 subsidies. A subsidy from the poor to the rich, and an even bigger subsidy from future generations to the present. If you live in Lafayette, Louisiana, you live in the median house, you pay the city $750 a year in taxes. In order to maintain everything that the city has promised they will fix and maintain, you would need to pay $8,250 a year. That will not happen. And because it will not happen, that means that large swaths of the city are going to be abandoned. They're going to have things go bad. And so people today are enjoying a lifestyle, a living arrangement that is far, far beyond what they're going to be able to sustain in time. It is a subsidy from the future to the present. No different than what you guys are doing here. No different. Lafayette, it makes a great case study because it is in many ways the median city, right? They've done everything, nothing real crazy, everything very median. This is the story of America. When we think about what these places look like, these are some just models we did in North Carolina. You've got a Kmart, $384,000 an acre, a Walmart at $967,000. These are places that the city was really proud of. They had run the subsidies to get these places in, put the sewer and the water and the interchange in at extreme public expense to get these. Yet when we go to their downtown and we look at some of their old buildings, you've got a warehouse that was converted into a supper club that's paying $5 million an acre. And my favorite one of all, Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. Now, here in Austin, you're still part of Texas, right? So you got to think big, right? Everything's big. That's Texas, right? Everything's big. And in Austin, you have, in many ways, even bigger designs, right? No one's going to accuse you of being small-minded or thinking narrowly, right? Yet when we look at these examples, this one question just jumps out at me. Do we have the competence, the ingenuity, the wherewithal to build something as exquisite as Jimmy's Pizza? I feel like we do. And if we could actually go out and fill all these gaps we have in our landscape with buildings of just that size and dimension and that degree of complexity, imagine how much wealth we would be creating. And not just wealth, but opportunity. Because when we look at this development pattern, we understand where the wealth in that development pattern goes, right? We understand where the profits go. We understand how people are employed and where the wages end up and what those wages are like. But when we consider places like this, in Jimmy's Pizza, where do those profits go? They go to Jimmy, right? And where does Jimmy bank? He banks locally. Where does he get his supplies? From other Jimmys in town. Who does his advertising and his marketing? Who's his accountant? Who's his attorney? There's a virtuous feedback loop. And I think oftentimes, particularly in places like this, where we're so inundated with the big, huge, flashy things that we can kind of point to as success, what we largely overlook is that the highest returning, highest value investments we can make are often really, really simple. Really, really simple. Almost beneath us kind of simple, right? This is something we call a Stroad. A Stroad is a street-road hybrid. We call this the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a Stroad is a transportation investment that tries to do two things at the same time and does neither of them very well. It tries to be both street and road. What's the difference? A road is, you can think of as a replacement of the railroad, which is a road on rails. And in a railroad, you would get on in one spot and get off in another spot, and there's a high-speed connection between the two. We don't have frontage railroads. We don't have drive-through railroads. It's an on-off, high-speed connection. If you look at this investment, we have invested huge amounts of money to move cars very quickly. You have 4 highway-scaled lanes. You have a center turn lane to get the turning traffic out of the way so the through traffic can fly through. We have made an enormous investment to move cars quickly. Do cars get to move quickly here? No. Why? Because we've set low speed limits. We have traffic signals that make you stop. And so even though we've invested enormous amounts of money to move cars quickly, nobody gets to move very quickly. What is a street? A street is, and always has been, a platform for building wealth. And when we look at this street, we can see we've created elements here to make it more wealthy. We put in decorative lights, wide sidewalks. We put out benches and planters and banners and different things to try to make this a wealth-producing street. Does it produce a lot of wealth? No. Because what happens when you're shopping on one side and you want to go over to the other? You're going to walk across 7 lanes. You're going to walk 3 blocks down to the light, wait your turn, walk across, walk back. No, what are you going to do? You're going to get in your car, you're going to whip a U-turn and go over to the other place. And the businesses all know this. And so what happens is they build big parking lots and drive-throughs, and you get a return on investment that is more like that taco joint than that old and blighted block. It fails to create wealth. We, as a default, build Stroads in this country today. And we have to not only stop doing that, but we have to have an active policy, if we want to make better use of the investments we've created, of converting our Stroads into either wealth-creating streets or high-value roadways. I want to prove to you that you know how to do this. When we go out as engineers and we build roadways and we want to move traffic very quickly, we have a set approach that we use. We say, what is the speed that we're expecting people to drive? What is the volume of traffic that we expect to handle? Given those two things, what does the manual tell us is a safe way to build this? And then what's the cost? Those are the engineer's values. And those values work really well on our roadways. On our streets, though, we have to have a different set of values. And I want you to tell me what those are. If you think about the streets outside here, outside where you live, where you shop, where you go out to eat, where you work, think about the streets that you're on. If you were to pick one of these 4 values to put first, which one would it be? And I'm going to ask you to say it. Would it be speed, volume, safety, or cost? Looking at the remaining 3 values and thinking about the streets out here, if you were to pick one of those 3 values, which one would be the most important to you? Would it be that we'd be able to move cars quickly, move a high volume of cars, or have our investments be cost effective? Would it be speed, volume, or cost? You see what we're doing here? I can't change these. If you had to pick between moving a high volume of cars or moving cars at speed, would it be speed or volume? Do you see what we did here? We understand the values to build great streets. We understand what it takes to build a successful, productive place. The primary characteristic is that we put safety over speed, right? Everything that you have built out here, everything, with very few exceptions, puts speed over safety. If you want productive places, if you want successful cities, you have to invert that. You have to put safety over speed. When we look and we step back and we look at where our successful, productive places are, what we see again and again is one variable that jumps out at us. One variable that shows up in every place that we can financially measure as being productive. That one variable is what? People. Where we see people, we see success. People are, in a sense, the indicator species of a successful place. And when we can design and build places and experience people in them, we know we are doing things right. We know that we built some place that is going to be successful. Here's our last concept. And this is an adage from Silicon Valley that is really powerful. It says, innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. We as humans have a preference for smart over dumb. But as people living in a very affluent society, we have a really, really strong preference for order over chaos. And if you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal at midnight, right? Where you can see for blocks and miles in every direction, yet you sit there and wait at the red for it to turn, right? We tolerate a lot of dumb in order to have order. Let me show you what this looks like from a city standpoint. This is the city of Memphis. The city of Memphis is a really great place. I've been fortunate enough to work with them on a number of things. They're some very smart people there doing some very innovative things. But Memphis is struggling. Memphis and Detroit often show up as 1, 2, 2, 1 in a lot of the desperation kind of statistics. Poverty rates, homicide rates, etc. Memphis did everything they were supposed to do after World War II. They did everything the playbook said. They ran highways through the middle of the city. They ran highways through the middle of neighborhoods. They ripped out their streetcar lines. They identified neighborhoods they considered substandard. They kicked people out. They rebuilt them in a way they thought would be better. They built out, extending sewer and water and roadways, annexing properties into the city. They eventually built a beltway. They kept building out further. They built a second beltway. They paid businesses to move to Memphis. They paid businesses to stay in Memphis. And at one point, they decided that what they needed to be a successful city was an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium down on the river. So they went and built a stadium, and they tried to attract a basketball team. Now, they were successful in getting a team, right? You guys are in a weird place in the world. Are you Spurs fans or Mavericks? Like, does it matter to you? You Spurs? Oh, okay, or college. That's cool. Memphis was able to get the Grizzlies from Vancouver. They enticed the Grizzlies to move to Memphis. The problem is, the Grizzlies didn't like that stadium. So the city wound up building them a new stadium a few blocks away. This one sat empty for 15 years. After $200 million of state and local subsidies, they were able to convert this building into a Bass Pro Shop. Orderly but dumb. Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is also in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a little street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue used to be a streetcar stop. When the highway went in, split the neighborhood in two, they ripped out the streetcar line, this block just died. Some residents, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, took matters into their own hands. They went out and worked with the property owners to get the things swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They painted their own bike lanes. They painted their own crosswalks. For one weekend, they invited businesses to come in and open up temporarily. They had an ice cream shop and an art gallery and a music store and a bike repair place. And while this isn't the greatest block in the city of Memphis, it's a heck of a lot better than it was before they started. I wasn't here for this project, but I was out there 6 months later. When I was out there 6 months later, every single storefront was occupied. I talked to the landlord of one of the buildings. He said he's able to charge double the amount of rent he was asking before the project for the last place to go. The city has gone out and documented 18 new businesses, 32 new jobs, $12 million of property value appreciation from a total public investment of zero. That's chaotic but smart. Now, I don't know what your city would do if you went out and started doing this. I can tell you what mine would. Mine would be out there Monday morning with the pressure washers, getting rid of this. You'd have the city engineers saying, that doesn't come from our, manual on traffic control devices. You'd have the attorneys saying, we potentially have some liability here, get rid of this. Memphis is desperate, and their desperation has made them really smart. So Memphis did go out with power washers and got rid of this. But they did it only after they had a plan to put it back permanently. You see, the city of Memphis is desperate, and their desperation has made them really smart. And because of that, they realized that, we could have had all the public hearings, all the surveys, all the visioning sessions, all the sticker charts on the wall, and we never would have identified this as a high return investment. But our residents did. And so our job as a city is to make sure it never goes back. We were so inspired by Memphis in my hometown that we created a group called A Better Brainerd. And we worked for a year in that neighborhood with the taco joint and the old and blighted block, just identifying and trying out little experiments to see if we can make the neighborhood better. We didn't have any budget. We were just trying things. We went out and put in some bike lanes with chalk to see if it would slow the cars, did some speed studies. We put in crosswalks where we saw people having a difficult time, saw if it would slow cars down, make it easier for people to cross. We set up an office out on the street and just talk to people. We would document where people would struggle. We saw the mom walking through the ditch with a stroller, weeds up to her waist. What are you doing? Well, I'm on my way to the grocery store. I've got to get milk today. My husband has a car. I have to go, and it's not safe to walk up here, so I'm walking down here. Saw the elderly woman walking in the middle of the street with a walker. Snow, mounds of snow. What are you doing? Well, I have to get to the pharmacy today. I don't have a choice. I have to go. The sidewalk has not been shoveled, and there's actually no sidewalk through most of this. So I'm walking out here. We started to document these things, and after a year, we put together this report called Neighborhoods First, where we identified 8 projects that the city could do that would directly address areas where we saw people struggling in this neighborhood. Little things like put a crosswalk in here, put a bike lane over here, plant a row of trees here. My city right now is in the process of spending $7.1 million to run sewer and water 1.5 miles out of town to the airport, where we hope to create a second business park. Our first business park was built in the 90s. It's only half full. This would be an air-oriented business park under the guise of creating jobs and growth and economic development. The total cost of our 8 projects, $16,700. Let's say that we go out and we spend $16,700 in this neighborhood and nothing good happens. Nobody's life is improved in any way. Nobody says, hey, this is a nice place to live. I think I want to go live here. Hey, I want to invest in this neighborhood. Hey, this is a neighborhood that's kind of up and coming. None of that happens. What's the downside? We're out $16,700, right? And we learned 8 things that don't work in this neighborhood. So next year we can go out and try 8 more things. I've got a sense, though, that if we take the time and go out like we did and observe where people struggle, that we actually can find really good projects. I went to the city engineer, I said, I think you could use a sidewalk here. Do you know what he said? Why would you say that, Chuck? You'll never find the high returning investments in your community sitting behind a desk. You'll never find them in a visioning session or a survey. You'll never find them in a capital improvements plan. The way you find them is by going out and observing where people struggle. We have been so obsessed for 2 generations with trying to get the dollar out on the edge that we are completely overlooking the pennies and the nickels and the dimes that are just laying there waiting to be picked up in our neighborhoods. And the fantastic opportunity we have today is that not only are those things easy to pick up, but if we stop and do it, if we make those small investments in improving people's quality of life, we can't help but make our people better off. Thank you so much. I forgot I did this. I actually lugged with me from Minnesota like 10 books. We put out a book a couple years ago, just like a Strong Towns kind of 101 thing. I've got some of those if you're interested. They're $10 each. We're just trying to kind of cover our costs and share our message. I've got some here. I don't want to bring them back with me. So if you're interested, I'll grab those. The other thing is we are a member organization. If you're interested in what we're doing and want to support us, our website has all the information on there. I still write the blog, and we now, instead of blogging 3 times a week, which is what I did back when I started, we blog 3 times a day. We've got contributors from all over the country. We do a podcast now twice a week. We're putting out a lot of content. Our content is all licensed under Creative Commons, which means you are free to take it and use it in any way that does good. If you want to take it, put your name on it, and submit it to the city council, I'm perfectly fine with that. Anything that we do that you can use to make your place better, please do. I am happy, more than happy, to take any questions or have any conversation that you want to have now. I know we're on people's lunch hour, so if you have to leave, you won't offend me by getting up. But if you want to stay, I have a plane to catch in like 3 hours, and I'm happy to hang out. Please.
2 questions. Did they agree to do those 85?
No.
Are they going to run for office?
No.
Or they would change their long
Let me answer both of those. The first answer is no, they didn't. And they didn't largely because it's too big of an intellectual jump, right? The problem is, and the problem that politicians have, and I get this, if you say I'm running on a platform of crosswalks and bushes and shrubs, you know, and your opponent is running on a platform of towers and sparkling, you know, goodness, you're like, you're almost frivolous, right? And so they have a really hard time grasping this. The way that I like to frame it for them, and I think I would frame it for you, is that you're running on a platform of making venture capital type of investments, really small, strategic, high upside investments, while your opponent is investing in buggy whips from, you know, the thing that was the good investment 100 years ago that no longer is. It's a different type of investment strategy. I'm not going to run for office because I don't have the temperament, but I am working with a number of people in my hometown to encourage them to run for office. And we actually, I think, I'm optimistic we'll be successful in that. And really, I do think, I'm an engineer, I'm a planner. I'm not a politician, and I've kind of shunned the notion that, you know, we can fix this that way. But I've come to realize that part of the thing we need to do is change the broad conversation, and that will, in a sense, change the political leadership, as opposed to focus on changing the political leadership without the broad conversation changing. So our organization is about changing the broader conversation with the hopes that other people will step up and fill in those gaps that we're not good at, like running for office. Please.
I wanted to ask about the difference between residential and business properties, because one big trend in Austin that's been, satirized all over the country is like, we're building all these massive commercial condos for the 150 people who move here every day.
Right.
And so it kind of relates to the flashy big box principle, but on the other hand,
They're going to ask you to use the mic so they can get you on tape. Yeah.
Oh no. But on the other hand, they're also asking, it's almost like if you bring more people to a residential street, then more people can use those areas. Do you see a difference between those two different types of new development?
Yes, there's a huge difference. And Austin, this is a real serious debate that I have with very intelligent, intellectual people who I respect deeply, and they disagree with me. So I'm gonna preface my comments with that, with the understanding that there's some very intelligent people that take the opposite side. I look at what you're doing with your towers as one of the most distorting and devastating things that you could do. If you look at a place like San Francisco, they have an affordable housing problem. Their problem is caused by their reaction to growth. So they have done two things. They've said, no more growth, and we're going to have price controls. And when you limit supply and you continue to increase demand, you have prices go way, way up. They have artificially distorted their market. You have not done either of those things, yet your prices continue to skyrocket. And you're building, building, building under this theory that if we just build more, we will actually solve the problem. You're actually creating the problem. And the towers are the problem. The towers are your financial problem. And let me explain it this way, and then we can talk about this in a more complicated way. If you have a vacant lot next to a 2-story building, next to a 20-story tower, what is that vacant lot worth? Well, if I'm going to buy the vacant lot and I'm going to build a 2-story building, I can only pay so much for it because that 2-story building is only going to create so much revenue. But if I'm going to buy that lot and build a 20-story tower, I can pay a lot more for it because I can get a lot more out of it, right? Developers come to you and they say, well, the land is this much, so I've got to build this on it to make it work, right? It's the tail wagging the dog in a sense. So by allowing 20-story towers, or 30-story, or whatever you're up to now, what you have done is you've frozen your land market. Because what you've said to every property owner is, the price for land is based on the highest and best use, which is a massive condo unit. And so if I'm sitting on a vacant piece of property, I have zero incentive to sell to anyone who's not willing to pay me the high premium of what a tower would be. Now, that's not a stable long-term situation, because over time, there's going to be, if every vacant lot you had were to get a 20-story tower, you would need 50 million people living here. You're not going to have that. So from a supply-demand standpoint, what that is a bubble. It doesn't make any sense, and it will eventually go away. But right now, because the market is so hot and because you've got the tower mania going on, you've artificially driven up the prices. And what that does is it eliminates from the market a whole segment of housing that just cannot be built. It cannot be built because you've distorted the market. So you get high-end condo units, and you get really cheap crap where people have to pay with their time in a commute. How do you deal with this? I have argued for a couple years now that Austin is a very unique situation where I think some type of, and I've called it a dynamic height limit, but something that would limit the ability of that you basically have to get the air out of that land bubble. And a height limit would do that. Because what you're doing is you're putting a cap on how much can be built on a site, and because of that, there's only so much revenue that can be created from that, and because of that, it would essentially prick that land bubble and drive the land prices down in these overinflated areas. The other thing it would do, however, and this is an important kind of, if you just did that, that would not work. You also have to look at the rest of your neighborhoods and say, how do we get them to, and the word we use is thicken up. Planners like to talk about density and infill. I hate those words because when planners go out and do density and infill, it looks horrible and it doesn't work and the neighborhoods hate it. We talk about thickening up. How do you take each neighborhood and allow it to essentially grow in that incremental way to the next increment of successful development? So if you have a neighborhood of single-family homes, how do you get accessory dwelling units and duplexes? If you have a neighborhood of duplexes and accessory dwelling units with single-family homes, how do you get that into row houses or something like that? So the idea is not to take single-family homes and replace them with towers, because what you do is you just totally screw up your market values. What you do is you say, we need this entire city not to have a huge spike of value in the middle and then fall off a cliff and have nothing out here. We need the whole city to thicken up at the same time. We need that investment and that wealth to be spread over a broader carpet. And if we do that, we start to correct some of these financial imbalances we have throughout the city, and you also start to fix the distorting of the property values that you've created with the towers. The theory of your current set of developers, and I assume politicians or advisors as well, is that we have our housing problem, our affordable housing problem is a function of supply and demand. And if we just create enough supply, we will be able to meet the demand. And I get that theory, and it's not wrong. It is right. But it is right in the same way that computer chip manufacturers, when they first started making chips, there was 20 different companies, and they couldn't make them fast enough because there was so much demand and they couldn't supply them. And then what happened is, because everybody ramped up production, they overshot. And then what you had the cratering, and you were left with like 3 chip companies, because some of them went bankrupt and some of them consolidated and some of them bought each other out. Okay? Austin, you do not want to experience a bubble and then a correction, right? You do not want your property values to go like this and like this. The developers are right. The market will bring it back into balance. The way it will bring it back into balance is you'll have a point where the supply exceeds the demand by so much that prices will actually come down enormously. You have a massive housing bubble right now, localized. Your property values are massively distorted, and it's not a function of supply and demand as much as it is a function of your tax system, your regulatory system, and the fact that you have chosen to meet the needs by having these massive towers. And I think you need to fix all 3 of those at the same time. Please.
Not an architect, engineer.
Good.
Enjoys living here.
Yeah.
I live in a central city neighborhood that is, you've got the 2 sides of people who want to maintain their single family home with a nice yard around it, but at the same time the pressure. A couple of things that I would argue about the pressure we're feeling and whether or not this is truly a bubble, as it probably is in other areas, is we have a tremendous number of people moving to Austin. I mean, Austin did some things right over the last 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden we are, a destination for the rest of the country. And what I'm seeing is that when the towers are built, they're not even built, they are on paper, and they have already sold every single one of the units. In my neighborhood, houses are sold within days, and it's not just to investors. Some are for investors, but it's also just people who are moving in, people who maybe originally bought outside the city and now want to, experience what it's like to live in a neighborhood that's actually relatively walkable, and you're just, 5-minute drive from downtown. I mean, I don't know if there's an Austin exceptionalism or what to some of what you're talking about, but I question the bubble.
Poverty rate is going down, which is the flip side of that.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to be wrong. I would not myself buy a house in Austin anywhere today, personally. And I feel like if I had to pick one market in this country that was a bubble, it would be this one. It'd be Texas in general, and it would be Austin in specific. I would recommend you read the book called The Big Short by Michael Lewis. Fascinating book. Describes basically what I hear when you explain the situation is, from an investment standpoint, something just called hot money, a hot money flow. Essentially, we have this national delusion where we're talking about, our economy, and our economy is growing and America's strong, and you cannot say that when we have interest rates for 7 years in a row now, going on 8 years at 0. And we still have all this money that we pumped into circulation that we're continuing to circulate around. We basically have an economy on life support. Yes, the lights are on, we've gotten the building back, but if you look at the national statistics, there's a broad consensus amongst nearly every economist that 2008 was a housing, what's the word? Bubble, right? Correction, and then correction afterwards, a bubble with the correct. If you look at national housing today, where are we in terms of values? We're at 2008 levels. How is that not a bubble? You look at the historic line, and it goes like this, and then you got a little bit in the 80s, a little bit in the 90s, and then in 2000 you go way up like this. And we went down, and then we went way back up here. How are we not, I mean, what's your baseline for a bubble? Is your baseline 2005, or is it 1950? You know, to me, we are living in a financial fantasy in many ways. And I would love it if your neighborhood, you know, is your neighborhood a special place? I'm sure. Would people prefer to live in a nice walkable neighborhood? Is Austin on to something in that regard? Without a doubt. Are there people who are living in insane circumstances here financially to make that work? Yes, just like San Francisco, just like New York. Does that mean the underlying finances of it are stable? No. And all we have to do is just look at the way you run your city government. I was told yesterday by one of your public officials that does the financial stuff that you are spending, and I'm going to use round numbers because I don't remember exactly, but you're spending roughly $30 million a year on street repairs. In order to keep up, you need to spend an additional $80 million, so $110 million total, right? That's a huge gap. Not going to happen. Do you know how you're making that up now? You asked to approve a bond in the last election. You're borrowing money. You're borrowing money to make that up. What you've got is, in a Ponzi scheme way, you're financing today's bubble by the transactions, the same way that the housing bubble was created by all the transactions. It was the transactions that drove the bubble. Everybody made money off the transactions, created a hot money flow in the bubble. We today are keeping this city afloat by the transactions. It can't go on. It can't go on. So I'm sorry. I mean, I wish I had like happier things to say. I love this city, and I think that, you know, once the finances, in a sense, reset, this is going to be a fantastic place to be. I have no doubt about that. But I would not want to be along for the ride. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about Lafayette, if you don't mind, since it's the
please.
median city.
Yeah.
And just interested, I'm from Louisiana, so I'm very familiar with their land use. Also, in that new urbanist development, I'm friends with the family who built that.
River Ridge?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the new old town at Mill Creek.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it was different ones.
Okay.
But
yeah.
anyway, Louisiana, and probably similar throughout the states, I know Louisiana specifically has really high homestead exemptions. I think cities are looking at, you know, their revenue in terms of their wealth. It's not so much on the properties, but it's from the commerce. So I guess that maybe that's a fallacy, probably.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you speak to policymakers and say, hey, it's not about just letting people live here in hopes that they do commerce.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get them to rethink that?
It's really, really hard because there's something seductive about the sales tax. Actually, there's a line I heard about the value-added tax, which we don't have anywhere in this country, really. We've got it subtly in a few sectors, but not really. But Europeans are keen on the value-added tax. And there's a line that I read once that said, Americans will love the value-added tax once Republicans figure out that it's an invisible tax and the Democrats figure out that it's a cash cow, right? Once we get that, then we'll have value-added tax. But retail tax is much the same way because it's seductively invisible and seductively raises a ton of money. The problem is that the retail tax is completely divorced from the wealth of the community. And I've written many times on this. I think the obvious observation on the retail tax is if I'm trying to run a city with a retail tax, what is the optimum resident? the optimum resident, well, first of all, the optimum resident is the one who lives outside of my city and just comes here to spend their money. That's the optimum resident because I have no cost, right? You just come here, give me your money and leave, that's perfect. And you see cities like the city of industry in California who have adopted this model, who have like a tiny population but billions of dollars of stuff. And that's, you know, you know, for most of us, the optimum resident would be someone who would move to our city, spend themselves into oblivion by consuming and going into huge amounts of debt, and then when they're about to default, leave and make way for someone else who could move in. In other words, the wealth and success of our city is at odds with the wealth and success of our people. We want our people to be consumers, not savers, not investors. We want them to be consumers because that's how we operate our city. If you're Istanbul, that makes a lot of sense. Because in Istanbul, what do you have? You have the commerce from one continent flowing through you to another continent, right? And if you can siphon a little bit of that off, you don't care about these people as long as they're coming through. But for a place like us, where like people live here, I actually need you to be successful, and I need you to be successful, and I need all of us to be successful for this place to work. So it's not a very good strategy. A better strategy, and I think a healthier way to look at it, is to just understand that when we put in a street, we have a certain collective communal commitment that we're making when we do that. And what we say is there's public investment. And when we look adjacent to that street, there's private investment. And in order for us to make this whole equation work, there's got to be a good ratio of private investment to public investment, private wealth to public investment. If you think about in an extreme example, you know, one of these towers here, and let's say that, you know, you've got one of these towers, what $1 billion, I don't know what one of these would be worth, but let's say it's, you know, $500 million, okay? The street out in front of it goes bad, and the pipe goes bad, and it needs to be fixed. And it's $5 million to fix it, or $3 million. Is there any way that the collective owners of that building are not going to fix that street? No, because really, when you look at all the wealth that's there, it's chump change to fix the street. It's like fixing a broken radiator or, you know, pump or something. You just fix it, right? Collectively, there's so much wealth there. Now go like to the way far edges of town, where you've got the old strip mall that's been abandoned for 10 years, and it's got 500 feet of road and street and sewer and water at, you know, $800 a foot. So you've got $400,000 of infrastructure there in front of that place. And, you know, that goes bad. Is anyone going to fix that? No, no one is. Why? Because there isn't the wealth there to justify doing it. So in order for us to be successful, we have to actually have a system where we're building our private wealth proportionate to what our public investments are. The retail tax divorces those things a long ways. The value-added tax divorces them even further. The property tax is closer but still at odds. Because with the property tax, what happens? The more I improve my property and the more I make it more valuable, the more tax that I pay. And so what it does is it creates an incentive, like you see with your parking lots out here, where everyone's just waiting for the big payoff. They pay very low taxes because you have a property tax, not a land tax. So you pay very low taxes because there's no improvement on it, and they can sit and essentially hold it and wait for their big payout. That's what's frozen your market. If you actually had a land tax, where you tax it at the value of the land, then improve it all you want and you don't pay anything more. And then that is, to me, like the optimum system, because now what you're doing is you're inducing private investment at incremental levels across a broad area without changing your public investment. You're improving that ratio. Do retail taxes have a place? Yes. But for me, I like to see retail taxes collected regionally and distributed back, you know, without the overhead from the state or the region, simply because what retail taxes do is they force a race to the bottom. So if I can get the big box store and you can get the big box store, and, you know, one of us wins and one of us loses when that happens, because whichever one gets it will bring everybody from the other city, then I have an incentive to subsidize that down to the point where I can just make $1. and we essentially both lose. So, but if we collect that tax regionally and then bring it back based on population, those systems tend to work out a little bit better. Does that make sense? Please.
What are things that we can do as individuals to help make a successful city so that we don't reach a desperation phase in Austin?
I would be remiss if I didn't say the one thing that our strategic plan at Strong Town says, which is share our message with someone else. We're, as an organization, trying to create 1 million people who care. And we talk about people who care enough to share our message with someone else. We need to change the culture. We need to change our conversation. And so, to me, the healthiest thing we can do is start talking to other people about these things. Let's get beyond that, though. What can I do? I'll tell you what I am doing. Not that I think that that's perfect, but I feel more comfortable with that than saying, here's what you should do. Because I think for everybody it's going to be a little bit different. But what I'm doing is trying to organize people in my own town. I am working with groups of people to try to change the conversation. I write weekly, sometimes a couple times a month, columns in our newspaper to talk about things going on. I actually sat down, we had a big project coming through town, and I created a website. If you ever want to see a better sixth, it's called abettersixth.org, a better sixth. I wrote this website about this project, and here's an alternative, and started a Facebook page and started organizing people around that. I'm trying to get candidates to step up and run for office. Actually bought copies of Mike Lydon's latest book, Tactical Urbanism, and distributed it to 12 people in town. So to me, what I'm comfortable with and what I think I'm good at is sharing a message. I see other people out there doing more organizing and taking action. So I see more other people out there doing petitions, actually out there doing projects. We did a little bit of that for a while, where we were out putting in temporary bike lanes and picking up trash and doing that kind of stuff. But those are the things that I'm doing and that I'm comfortable with. I see people in other cities, though, the Memphis example is awesome. Those people just hack their neighborhood. They say, we own this place. I don't like how fast the cars drive, so I'm going to put stuff out here to slow it down. I don't like what's going on here, so I want to plant some trees. I don't like this radius here because it's too big. I'm going to put some stuff in the street and slow people down. They're literally like taking ownership of their place, and I am inspired by that too. Other people run for office. It shocks me how many people run for office and say, I'm a Strong Towns candidate. Here's my platform. I don't know if it's not me. It might not be you. But I think there's a range of things that we can all do that we're comfortable with and competent at. I would just find what that is and do it. Please.
It's all right. Strong Towns candidate, and I'm curious, we've spoken a lot about what cities can do, but we're in a county building. What role do you see counties playing, particularly in the Stroads conversation?
Yeah, that's really good. Counties are, and I don't know the city-county relationship here in Texas as intimately as I do other parts of the country. Counties are historically really destructive. And in a very strange way, if you are a City of Austin resident, you're also a county resident, right? So you pay county taxes. But oftentimes county politicians look at the city residents as a different collection of people than what they call county residents, which are the rural people who live outside the city. And it creates this really weird thing. And I was in Houston, and I pointed out, because Houston has very strong county government, and the county was out essentially doing economic development and trying to get new subdivisions and new growth and create jobs. And the city was trying to do the same thing. And what you found when you got to the bottom of it is that they were both on a tug of war, pulling in opposite directions. even though the city's taxpayers were also the county's taxpayers. And in fact, the city's taxpayers paid the bulk of the county's taxes. So in a sense, they were undercutting themselves. I think that counties, I would like to see, just in general, counties out of the land use game. Now, counties have a regional transportation function. And in Minnesota, I actually wrote about this because we have the state DOT, we have county as regional entities, and we have cities. And I called counties the dinosaur waiting for the meteorite to strike. Because what the counties were doing is simply out there building Stroads. They were not building anything that had regional significance. And they were not out there building anything that was really hyper-local, because that was local. And I said, we can basically take the entire county system and migrate it either up the food chain or down the food chain and make them way more productive investments. I still think that that's the case in Minnesota. Are there places where the county could be a force for good? I think so, but I think it's going to tend to be more on the road side, not the street side. If you're building, if you're taking a piece of transportation infrastructure and you're gumming it up with economic development, that needs to slide down the food chain and become a city thing. Because cities have more of a positive feedback loop to make that work, and I think have more abilities and incentives. And plus, when the city makes it work, it also benefits the county. I mean, that's the thing, is like everything the city does that's good also benefits the county. So you know, you're not at odds with each other. Make the city successful and you're successful. If you can, though, make a transportation investment that does serve a regional need, and a lot of times in the state highway system, there are gaps where we can create regional infrastructure that does fill some of those. I know you've got this crazy toll road over there, and you've got, you know, Interstate 35, and there's some needs to make some cross connections. Those might be good places where the county can step in and be helpful. Because now you're dealing with traffic flow over large areas and you're building really great roads. But counties have a hard time because they sit in the middle of the food chain, and they really kind of prey and are predator, you know, at the same time. And it's a very difficult place to be. I think the overriding philosophy for a county should be to just internalize the notion that from a land use standpoint, whatever is good for the city is also good for the county. That's not to mean that everything that's good for the county is good for the city, but pretty much everything that's good for the city is also good for the county. Because if you get a job in the city, it's also in the county. And if you get a new dollar of tax base in the city, it's also in the county. So, you know, the same can't be true the other way. Thank you. I wish you luck. I'm gonna need it. Should we take one more? Okay. Go ahead.
Chuck, first, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
A lot of us are fans from several years back, at least.
That's very kind.
And I think we generally agree with everything you're saying nationally and internationally, and the finance situation and so forth. I wanted to try to lay a little more information on you in terms of our local situation.
Yeah.
And I don't know how familiar you are with this, but there's been a political faction in Austin for about the last 30 years that has tried to resist growth.
Yep.
Much the way it's been done in Seattle and San Francisco and other places.
Right.
We have a new comprehensive plan that essentially is attempting to densify the core of the city and reduce our level of sprawl.
The compact and connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think part of that effort, a big part of it, is the thickening of the land use intensity that's outside of the central business district.
Yep.
And we're trying to support low-rise wood frame construction and add small-scale density in that way,
Yep.
not through towers. Our trouble is that the no-growth people are resisting that effort in a very strong way. And I, just a few months ago, looked at some MLS stats from the central city. And it turns out that with all the new supply in the central business district, our median price has stayed almost the same since the beginning of 2012, while those unthickened neighborhoods around the median price went up 95% from the beginning of 2012 to July of this year. Do you agree that that thickening up is something that's critical? And if so, do you have any suggestions for how to sell that change of attitude?
Yeah. Yes, the thickening is essential. It's a key part. It's a key part of everything. And I think it's important to draw a distinction between our pre-depression development pattern and our post-depression development pattern, because there's really two primary characteristics that separate them. Post-World War II, we built everything to a finished state with the assumption that it will be frozen then in amber in time and never change. But if you go back pre-World War II, pre-depression, everything that was built incrementally in a state that was always in perpetual change. So that's what we've done differently. And what that does is it stagnates neighborhoods. And when we look at a city that has $30 million a year, roughly, that they're spending on street maintenance, but they need to be spending 110, what that tells me is that long term, you're going to have to triage your system. You're not going to have enough money to fix everything you have to fix. How do you deal with these neighborhoods? To me, I offer them a deal. And here's the deal. I say, I acknowledge the fact that new growth in Austin is not good. And that when you look around and you see what's happening, you say, I don't want that in my neighborhood. I acknowledge that that is a valid point of view. I would not want a lot of what's happening in my single-family home neighborhood either. But that doesn't mean your neighborhood can be a free rider, or that you can just continue to go on and be frozen in amber and essentially be subsidized by everybody else. You have to have a growth trajectory. So here's the deal I would make. Your neighborhood over here, we are triaging city funds. We can only maintain so many miles of road and so many blocks of street. So we will prioritize neighborhoods that agree by right to allow the next increment of development. Not 3 or 4 increments, not skipping over different, but if you will allow your single family neighborhood to thicken up, to accept duplexes and accessory dwelling units throughout, if you'll allow that to happen over the next couple of decades, then we can legitimately, as the public, right? We can triage, if we've got to pick 2 neighborhoods and one neighborhood says, nope, we want to remain frozen in amber, we will not do anything to change this, then I say, okay, here's your streets. We can't maintain them publicly. You don't generate enough wealth in this district to justify that. Here's your streets back. We'll maintain the main thoroughfare through, but everything else is now yours. Over here, we say, yes, we will absorb that housing. We will absorb that. We will thicken up. I say, okay, in a triage, I can now justify taking collective dollars from everyone and putting that into your local street, because your local street is now solving a community-wide problem. It's doing it in a way that is also respectful to you, because we're not going to put a 20-story tower next to your single-family home, but you might have to accept an accessory dwelling unit next door, or you might have to accept that the person across the street is going to have 2 doorways instead of 1. To me, that is a way we can start to have the conversation and actually get a little bit of wiggle room and feedback. I know that's not easy. The cool thing about your neighborhoods right now is that I've run into a couple people who are part of what I would just call alternative neighborhood associations. So you actually have essentially political parties rising up on a neighborhood level. We have the Frozen in Amber Party and we have the Incremental Growth Party. And they're actually vying for influence in your neighborhoods. And you know what? That's kind of cool. That's kind of cool, because those are interesting conversations that need to happen. Are you one of those? One of those? Okay, good. I'll tell you what. Every city needs a little bit of a troublemakers. Not big troublemakers, but we all need, like, if you look at great cities embody complex the complexity that we see in natural organic systems. And natural organic systems become stable and prosperous over time by having low levels of continuous stress and agitation. And so really, great cities, great places, are not places that are free of stress. They're not places where everyone looks like me. They're not places where everyone has the same income level on a block. They're places that over time have low levels of stress and agitation that make things churn and grow and adapt and change. You're the kind of person that every neighborhood needs. So let's end with that. Thank you, everybody. And I will, Hayden, we got some time before we have to go, so if anybody wants to just chat one-on-one, we can do that too. Thank you so much.